if we could come together. Again, I want to thank everyone who came out last night to the reception we had for the American College of Surgeons and for Dr. Turner. And I want to thank Dean Freshlug for making this trip available. We've really had the pleasure of having her visit with us for a day or two. I know she's met with many of the residents and with the Women in Surgery group and a variety of the students. And so it's really been a privilege to have the college so well represented on campus to both our students and people who aren't even thinking about being surgeons. So Dr. Turner, as many of you know, is the Director of Member Services for the American College of Surgeons. There are, I think now, 4 or 5 positions that are full-time positions in the college that are held by surgeons who keep a little of their practice active, but primarily make this their professional life now. The member services, advocacy, quality are areas that are really led, in addition to the college in general, by Dave Hoyt, a trauma surgeon. So it's just interesting to appreciate that there are a variety of different avenues and career paths for all of us in surgery, but also how much hard work the college does for surgeons in a variety of areas. And as we all know, maintenance of certification has become a much more significant part of what we do for the boards, and the college meets that need. And also getting out in front of issues around quality and having surgeons define those issues rather than administrators or other people, I think has really been an important part and a part of the history of the college for a long time. In addition, the issues around advocacy that the college, none of us have time in our busy practices to do the things around making sure that the politicians at SGRs get handled properly, that the propositions recently that were defeated were done that would have influenced our malpractice. So these are important things that we kind of take for granted, I think, to a certain extent, that the college does behind the scenes for us. So it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Turner, who is a minimally invasive surgeon by training, did her training in New York and Columbia after training in D.C., and now splits her time between Chicago and D.C., and we are thrilled to have her come speak with us today. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I had the privilege of meeting with some of you yesterday and a couple more people today, so I look forward to that. And again, would really like to thank Drs. Freischlag and Farmer for the kind invitation. And it really is nice to come and be able to spend a little bit more time than just an hour here and an hour there to meet with folks along the whole spectrum. So some medical students, some residents, some faculty, and then talk about things that are interesting. So I'm not going to talk much about the college, although I'm happy to answer questions about anything related to the college at the end. But what I am going to talk about, which I hope is interesting because it really is something that's relevant to all of us as we are leaders and teachers and learners in our institutions, is the surgical workforce. So generational change, innovation, communication. We're going to cover a couple of things, and then I'll leave some time for questions because some of it is perhaps provocative or interesting, whichever the word is you might want to use. So again, it's a real pleasure to be here. So starting with some slides from the AAMC. So looking at May 2012 AAMC data about medical schools. So enrollment continues to increase at our medical schools. There's expected to be a 30% increase by the year 2016 in terms of the number of medical students that we are turning out. So that's a 30% increase compared to 2002 to 2003. And interestingly, 60% of that growth will occur at the medical schools that we all know about, the ones that we expect, the 125 that have been around forever. But 25% will occur in relatively new schools that have been accredited since 2012. And 17% will come from schools that are currently in their applicant or candidate status. So we continue to build more medical schools and turn out more students, but our GME positions are still inadequate and funding is going nowhere good quickly. And so that's a problem for those of us in specialties that are still trying to defend our GME positions. So this next series of slides are also from the AAMC, and it's not important that you should be able to read all of them from the back of the room, but just know that the arrow there points to California. So what you need to know is that this is every state arrayed down the left column here. And this particular slide is active physicians per 100,000 by degree type. So the blue line are the MDs, the green lines are the DOs. And what you'll see here is that arrayed by state, Massachusetts has the most, Mississippi has the least, and here's California, right in line with the state median, which is about 245 physicians per 100,000 population. So this next one is the percentage of physicians who are female. So again, arrayed by state, Massachusetts at the top, Utah at the bottom. Here's California, a little bit above the mean. So the state median is about 31% female physicians. California is a little bit above the mean there. This is the percentage of active physicians who are age 60 and older. So we're talking about the aging population. People are retiring more quickly. So let's look here. New Mexico is at the top with the highest percentage of physicians over 60. North Carolina down here at the bottom. And here's California, second from the top, with a particularly high percentage, something over 30%, where the state median is about 26% of practicing physicians who are age 60 and older. Now, the flip side of that coin, though, is that California does a great job of retaining and having a good pipeline. So this is the percentage of physicians retained in that state from undergraduate medical education. And here California is at the very top. So California at the top, and then these are some medical schools, some states with no medical schools. But of the states with medical schools, New Hampshire here at the bottom, retaining only 10%. California there at the top, retaining well over 60% of those who go to medical school here. So yes, California's physicians are aging, but you're retaining many more of your physicians than most states. So what does that have to do with surgery? Well, so let's talk about some projection models. So this slide and the next several come from the F.A.C.S Center at UNC Chapel Hill, and I have to say a word of appreciation for Dr. George Sheldon, who did a lot of this work, and others at the F.A.C.S Center. And they worked on looking at relative change in physician headcount. So if you look from 2010 to 2025, there's a projected decrease of all surgical specialties. So you'll see here, all surgery is expected to be down about 13%, some more, some less. So neurosurgery, is only down about 2%. But let's look at thoracic down here at the bottom. So thoracic is expected to be down some 25% if you look at the time frame from 2010 to 2025. So clearly it's not enough to just build more medical schools, because we have to make sure that they're going into surgery, because we are expected, more so than our primary care colleagues, to not have enough people to serve the needs of our patients. So let's talk about surgical workforce maldistribution, because again, it's not just a matter of numbers that you turn out, it's a matter of where do they go, where do they practice, and are they where they need to be. So these next series of slides, again from the F.A.C.S Center. So this is a map, surgeons per 100,000 population from 2006. And it's not really important that you should look at every tiny little square, but just know that all of the little areas are counties in the United States. And the numbers range from 40 or more surgeons per 100,000 population, and that's the darkest green, through the lighter green, through kind of the beige colors. And the white boxes are counties in which there are 0 surgeons per 100,000 population. So as you can see, there's swaths of the United States that essentially have no surgeons to care for their population. So there's areas that are doing fairly well, but what we can see from this is that there probably is a maldistribution as much as anything else. And it's hard to pin down what is the right number. I think if you ask people who write about this, they'll say the right number is somewhere, 20 to 25 surgeons per 100,000 population is what you need. So 40 may be too much, 25, which is a relatively lighter shade of green. But in any case, this is 2006. So this is 2009. So we know this is a problem, and are we able to impact it? I would argue that this looks kind of like the 2006 map that we just looked at, and here's 2011. So we know this is a problem, we know there's a maldistribution, but we are not able to necessarily impact it. And so this final graph represents a percent change across those 3 maps I just showed you. And so the dark green on this one represents a gain of 100% or more of the surgeons. The lighters are no change, and then the brown areas are places that either lost most of their surgeons or all of their surgeons. So again, the point of this is that there are areas of our country that have no surgeons or inadequate numbers of surgeons, and we have an issue when we look forward to projections. So how are we going to fix that? Let's talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to share some initiate demographics from the ACS just because it's a nice snapshot in time to give us a sense of sort of what does the pipeline look like. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not, every surgeon in the country, but it gives us a little snapshot in time. So this is from 2 years ago data, so 2013. But of the class of initiates, women made up about 22% of that class of initiates. You can see arrayed here by race and ethnicity. Almost 8 in 10 fellows were under the age of 45. Half had been in practice for 5 years or more. So you see there were a few folks who were in the more senior years, but many of them come in at the beginning of their careers. I thought this was interesting. So clearly many specialties represented. The ACS is, in fact, the house of surgery for all specialties. So there is representation from every specialty. But an interesting thing that I thought was this. So when we look at, if we were to pull these data from 20 years ago, the number of employed physicians would be significantly lower. And what we see here is that essentially it's kind of a third, a third, a third. So those are the academicians, those in private practice, and those are employed. And I would say that we can really expand employed by hospital to include employed by hospital or large multi-specialty group. Because again, if we look at our more junior surgeons, they are not opting to go into independent private practice. And solo practice is nearly dead. Just people are not hanging out their solo shingles so much anymore. I mean, again, there are some rural areas of the country where that still happens, but by and large, our more junior surgeons are looking for an employed model, and we have to shift with the times because that's different than it might have been a number of years ago. So, just a little bit more kind of interesting information. A majority lived and worked in urban or suburban areas. About 20% lived in practice in small towns or rural areas. And so that, again, represents that kind of middle of the country that we saw in those maps. And then, again, the regions that they come from in the U.S. and Canada, and then, again, regions of the world. So about 25% of the initiates were international. And you can see sort of arrayed there on the right side of the slide where they come from. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about generational change. So we're recruiting these young surgeons into our practices, into our institutions, into our divisions, our departments. So let's talk a little bit about the fact that we're not all homogenous. There's a difference. And at first, maybe this whole generational thing seems a little bit hokey, but the more I've read about it, the more I believe there actually is something to it, and a lot of smart people are writing about it. I think it's not all going to apply to you. So as I go forward, I'm going to be making some sweeping generalities. So don't, like raise your hand and be like, that doesn't apply to me. But just take it for what it's worth, which is that there are some big buckets that we can talk about. So what's a generation? So a generation is a group of individuals born or living about the same time, a group of generally contemporaneous individuals who are regarded as having common cultural or social characteristics and attitudes. So the four generations that are here in the workplace now are up there on the slide. So the silent generation, born from 1925 to 1945, the baby boomers from 46 to the early 60s, generally thought to be about 61, Generation X from 61 or 62 up through 81, and then the millennials, or Generation Y, those are synonymous, born from 1982 to the mid-1990s. I'll tell you that my kids' generation is Generation Z, so that is a thing now. Like Generation Z exists, people are starting to talk about that, so there's a whole other thing that we're going to be talking about 20 years from now, about what the Generation Z people need and want. But why this is relevant is because longer lifespans and people who stay in the workplace longer means that all four of these generations are living and working together. So it's not as though you can say, I'm only going to interact with Generation X and the baby boomers, because we still have silent generation folks who are working with us, and we still are going to have this influx of the millennials, and soon it'll be Generation Z. So this is a real topic of conversation. So just two short examples to talk about kind of generational change. So, Encyclopedia Britannica, who had an encyclopedia at home growing up? Okay, so there's some hands going up. So we were a World Book family. We weren't a Britannica family, but whatever. So we had the World Book. And so there was a time when if you were a family who cared about education and you wanted your kids to learn stuff and know things, you bought the encyclopedia and you kept it in your house, and that's where you went for resources. And my kids think that is the most hilarious thing ever in life. So we go to my parents' house, and that World Book is in the attic, and like the M is really fat because there was a lot, and then XYZ is really narrow, and it's all like cramped crammed into one book, all of X, Y, and Z. And so my kids think it's hilarious. So, we looked at the encyclopedia, and then you went to the library if you wanted more, and you learned the Dewey Decimal System, and you worked in the card catalog, all of which is ridiculous to, kids who just, you Google it. I mean, of course you do. That's how you learn things. So, but the point is that in a relatively short period of time, we've gone from the Encyclopedia Britannica being the absolute be-all and end-all of what you would do to educate yourself to it being so ridiculous that people don't even know what it is anymore. And for what it's worth, the Encyclopedia Britannica plant has now shuttered its doors and has closed. It went out of business about 2 years ago, so it no longer exists as an entity anymore, which is sort of interesting. The other example I would highlight is that of, a timepiece. So, there was a time when timepieces were extremely expensive. They were incredibly valuable. It's sort of a family heirloom passed from generation to generation. And that was supplanted by the ability to make watches relatively inexpensively. So, I'm a kid of the 80s, so, swatches. Anybody else have a swatch? All right, so you switched out the band to match, your outfit or, whatever. So watches were cheap. You had a whole laundry list of them, and you would trade them out for whatever reason. And so recent studies looking at college students and asking them what do they do when they need to know what time it is, 80% of them say they look on their cell phone. So they don't even wear watches anymore. If they do, it's a fashion accessory, not actually to tell time. So I have to laugh because I'm giving this talk with a watch, which is funny. So it was a gift from my husband, the iWatch, who gives me watches, bless his heart, and they sit in my jewelry box because I never, ever, ever wear them. Because I look on my phone to tell what time it is, too. The only reason that I actually wear this is because it's useful if my phone is in the bottom of my bag and I need to know who's texting me. So that's like why it's valuable. So, but the point is that, again, we've totally moved over a relatively short amount of time from something that seemed really incredibly important to something that seems absolutely obsolete. And so, we can't ignore generational change and influence of changing times. So just a few slides on what some characteristics are. And again, don't throw fruit if this doesn't apply to you personally, but know that there is probably some accuracy to a little bit of this. So the baby boomers, parents were generally traditional married couples. Discipline was a critical home value. That was what it was espoused. These individuals often were able to start their first job with minimal debt and had a fairly linear career path. I mean, you may move institutions, but by and large, a pretty linear path. And your future was assured with hard work. So you put your nose to the grindstone, work hard, get a good education, and there's a near guarantee of subsequent reward. So people got married relatively young. And characteristics ascribed to the baby boomers are often words like loyal. They expect a long-term career, often at a single institution. They value the paying of dues. That's a valuable thing on its face. They respect authority by virtue of the title. So if you are sitting in the chair of the fill in the blank, then you are to receive authority by virtue of the fact that you're sitting in that chair. And so they're often quite offended if deference is not forthcoming from more junior people who don't get the value of the chair you're sitting in or don't appreciate the value. And self-sacrifice is often described as virtuous and often can be wistful for a previous era when things were a little bit more simple or it was a little more clear what the rules were. And so these are some of the things used to describe the baby boomers. So moving on to Generation X. So divorced parents were twice as common as those in the previous generation, and these are individuals who will often say that they seek greater balance between work and family or between life and work or what have you. So they're willing to work hard, but they're more desirous of balance and may say that. They expect multiple career searches across their career span, may expect to move from institution to institution, would actually think it was a little bit out of the ordinary to spend their entire career at a single place. Paying dues is not valued or relevant. I mean, yeah, it's necessary, but it's not on its face to be valued. And they question authority as an intellectual exercise. Like, this is what we were all taught in college. Someone tells you to do something, and as an intellectual exercise, your response is, why would I do that? Can you explain to me why? Give me an explanation. So it's just a matter of intellectual exercise. They question authority, which you can already see where we're going with that doesn't always sit well with the person who's of a different generation. So self-sacrifice may have to be endured, but is certainly not to be embraced. And they're a witness to downsizing of our economy, Enron or fill in the blank. So commitment and loyalty isn't really smart. They've seen people put all their eggs in one basket and then have the rug pulled out from under them. So they don't actually think that's very smart to be particularly loyal to any given institution. So they're often described as a sandwich generation. So aging parents for whom they have some responsibility plus kids. And so they're sandwiched in between. Unpredictable economy is what they know all about. And for academic faculty, they often are expected to do sort of private practice work without the private practice payoff. So there's this sense of, I kind of want to do academics, but man, if I'm going to work that hard, I might as well go into private practice and make more money. So you're having this conversation with them as they're mapping that out. Often have over $100,000 of educational debt before they begin their careers. And this disproportionately dissuades the economically disadvantaged. So you can't necessarily afford to do a residency that's 9 years long if you're already economically disadvantaged and medicine was your way out of wherever you started in the first place. They expect this career path of spirals and plateaus, and a longer lifespan and less guarantee of retirement can make them less satisfied because they're like, I'm going to have to work till I die because Medicare is not going to be there, or Social Security, or what have you. So they have that sort of concern. And women are still often forced into this either-or trajectory of family and career. So let's talk about Generation Y. So these are by and large the children of the boomers. So self-esteem trumped rules and discipline. If you ask about what were the home values that were really brought forward, spanking was less favored. This is more of a coaching and timeout kind of home environment. And they often start their first job with significant debt. The last numbers that I saw are that people are coming out of med school with $200,000 worth of educational debt. So they're starting already $200,000 a house, essentially $250,000 in the hole before they even start working. So many go back to live with their parents at some point after college. They're saving money, or they're buying a car, or they're traveling the world, or whatever it is that they do before they enter the workplace. And to them, the future is not assured, even with hard work. So they, by and large, want the rewards up front. And again, you can see how that is very much not what the more senior people want to hear. And the average age at marriage continues to move up. So they're often described as ambitious, demanding, high maintenance. And I'm not making a value judgment, so I want you to realize that. But I think it's just important to know what the perception is of all of these other generations, because it can help broker our conversations in a more effective way. So they question authority as a matter of course. I mean, it's not even an intellectual exercise. It's just what they do. You tell them to do something, their answer is why. Why would I? So because we've done it that way all the time, or because this is how we do it here, is not a compelling reason. And that doesn't always get you the buy-in that you want from your team. So there's a perception that companies or organizations should be loyal to them, not the other way around, because they've been taught that they're bringing something to the table since earliest childhood. And so they're expecting you to appreciate what they bring to the table. And they're willing to work hard, but a job is often not the highest priority in their lives because they have these other things that they want to do and will do, whether it's travel the world or, what have you, that they fit work life around. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different if you're a surgeon, but I think there's some similarities that come across all generations. And both men and women, definitely not a gender thing, both men and women put a lot of value on extracurricular activities, balance, and words like that. So what they expect, and this is again where there can be confrontation, is they expect higher starting salaries and immediate rewards. So they come in the door talking about what they want and what they need. And so for the more senior person, they're like, how do you get off even walking into my office, asking for this when you haven't even demonstrated that you know how to, do a whatever. And so again, it's just a different way of looking at the conversation. And so in a private practice setting, it may manifest itself as expecting smaller payout for the senior partners, a desire for a more equality-based relationship. But again, for the person in the middle, this can seem like a page from that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Because you've come in, you've been in this situation, you're expecting your payout at the end, and all of a sudden someone else comes in and changes the metric, and you're left kind of holding the bag, trying to figure out when you get your payout, or whatever it is that you were expecting at the end of the day. So some core elements. Driving millennials, so impact. Making a difference is a strong motivational force for millennials. They really want to feel like they're making a difference. And salary and benefits are also important, but it's important in many ways because it impacts your life outside of work. Communication is expected in a thoughtful, well-modulated way, couched in supportive and professional language. So they're kind of not hearing you if you come at them wrong, which is, again, anathema to people who are like, I'm giving you good information, you should take it in the spirit in which it's given. And so again, there's room for some communication on both sides. They're looking for flexibility. So the division in the work world between the bricks and mortar place and who works from home, who works remotely, that manifests itself in medicine by people who often will say, I'm looking for a part-time or a shared opportunity, or people are trying to cobble together things that again seem extraordinarily out of the ordinary to us as surgeons. And I'm not, again, not making a value judgment about whether it's good or bad, but just saying if we're looking to recruit people who are thinking this way, we have to know what's in their head before we just, say, yeah, that's ridiculous, there's no way that we can accommodate you. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I think this is sort of a slide that I borrowed from someone about cultural competency and the generational divide and diversity. So I'm going to just highlight this one line here about feedback, because I think it's really illustrative. So the traditionalists, also known as the silent generation, so in terms of feedback, for them, no news is good news. Leave me alone, I'm doing my job. If you don't talk to me, I'm probably doing fine. Leave me be. For the baby boomers, feedback once a year with lots of documentation. Haul me into your office June 30th every year, lots of documentation, tell me what you need to tell me, and then let me go back to doing what I'm doing. But make sure to document it. For the Generation Xers, sorry to interrupt, but how am I doing? So these are the same people that learned in college to question authority as an intellectual exercise. They also learned in college to be introspective and to ask for feedback, because that's what you do. And so they're like, sorry to interrupt, but can I have some feedback? Can you tell me what's going on? And then over here to the millennials, feedback whenever I want it at the push of a button. So they want real-time feedback. They want it immediately. So if you tell them something that they did wrong 2 months from now at some quarterly interview, they're going to be like, what? Like, what are you even talking about? Why didn't you tell me then? So it's an interesting series of expectations. So essentially, effective communication is key. Like, that's sort of the bottom line of that whole part of this talk, which is effectively communicating and knowing that there's a mechanism that may work well for you, that may not work well for the person you're talking to. But if you want to recruit the best and the brightest and build your team, you're going to have to be sensitive to some of these issues. So I'm going to shift to the last thing I'm going to cover and talk a little bit about innovation, diversity, and collective intelligence, which follows from what we've talked about so far. So if you seek growth, innovation isn't your best friend, it's your only friend. And this is important for those of us in surgery. This is important for those of us who are leaders, those of us who are building teams, those of us that are trying to move our division, department, fill in the blank practice from good to great. And you have to really work on innovation, which is not necessarily something that comes naturally to us, because we all kind of live steeped in our comfort zone. So just think in your mind, what's the most innovative organization you can think of and why? Just kind of, give yourselves 15 seconds to kind of think about that. And what I'll say about that is it depends on who you ask. So, who's the best? Who's the best company? So if you ask the U.S. Patent Office, who's the best company? This is what they'll tell you. IBM, Samsung, Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Microsoft, Toshiba, Honhai, GE, and LG. What do they all have in common? Technology, electronics, whatever. So if you ask the patent office, that's what constitutes the best. If you ask Forbes, who's the best? They'll tell you Salesforce, Alexion, Amazon, Red Hat, Baidu, Intuitive Surgical, Rakuten, Edwards Lifescience, Larsen & Toubro, and ARM. What do they all have in common? Money, profit, return to the stakeholders. These are companies where their P&L sheets look awesome. So if you're Forbes, that's what you're looking for. So what about Fast Company? So Fast Company is a magazine that focuses on innovation. So I've kind of given it away. So the companies that Fast Company says are the best: Google, Bloomberg, Xiaomi, Dropbox, Netflix, Airbnb, Nike, ZipDial, DonorsChoose.org, and Yelp. These are innovators who are doing something different, keeping it moving, sort of looking at where the puck is going, to use the Wayne Gretzky metaphor. So the point of this slide is that who's the best depends on who you ask. And so if you're asking the same people the same questions, you're not going to get the full picture of what really is best or what really can drive you to innovation. So innovative firms often have very little in common. They're not all cut from the same mold, and often it's not money. Like, money is not the barrier to innovation. It doesn't always require a huge investment of capital to be innovative. What it requires is somebody to have a new thought, or a couple of people to have a new thought, and then you move forward in that direction. And often competitors innovate in opposite ways. So same problems, similar companies, but different people in the seats on the bus, and they come up with different solutions to a similar problem. Interesting to mention that incumbents are seldom the first movers. So if you're the company or the institution who's doing really well in your space, you're not likely to be the innovator because you're comfortable. You're doing okay. It's all good. And so somebody else, is going to come zoom around you because they have nothing to lose. So they're going out and doing the extra thing or the creative thing, and you may get left, flat-footed. Breakthroughs occur at the edges of the bell curve. So again, it's not the people always right in the middle, who are doing well in the middle of the bell curve. Sometimes it comes at the end. And diversity within team ranks is key to your success. So whatever kind of team you're building, you want to make sure you have a lot of different voices. So this book, very well-regarded book, Harvard Business Review, Teaching Smart People How to Learn. So the author talks about privilege and why privilege is a bad thing if you want innovation and you want to teach smart people. And I think this really is relevant for those of us in surgery who, I think we'd all say, we're pretty smart folks, right? But often smart people, especially smart people who've been smart all along, fall into this trap and they haven't had the opportunities to consider the alternatives that failure affords them. Because they may have been the smartest kid in their class forever, or everything has come pretty easily to them. And so in some sense, when you're building a team that's focused on innovation, if you have all the smart people who do really well all the time and have never had a failure, have never had to come back from adversity, you don't have grit, you don't have problem solving, you don't have some of these solutions that come from having had a different experience. Another thing that he says in the book is that when they do fail, often instead of being introspective and being kind of hard on themselves and critically examining themselves, they'll cast the blame outwards. And so again, when we're all being introspective about that, that's something that we want to keep in mind. And innovation is about what you don't know how to do right now. So for me, probably the most important thing that was in that book was innovation requires accelerating the failure cycle, not avoiding it, which is counterintuitive in many ways because we're trying to avoid failure. And certainly, again, as surgeons, we can't afford failure from the patient care standpoint. But from the standpoint of creative thought, building a team, thinking new thoughts, being innovative, you actually can try new things, should try new things, and accelerate through the failure cycle, multiple shots on goal, assess, reassess, and then move forward. So creativity is a #1 desirable attribute for leaders. So this is from an IBM Global CEO study last year. So Fortune 500 companies, what is the #1 desirable attribute for leaders? And it was creativity. Individuals who can assess, not be stuck in the same place, and have a new idea or build a team where they're surrounded by people that bring them new ideas. So a little bit for the next couple of slides, I borrow these from Jeff DeGraff. So he's a University of Michigan business professor who talks a lot about innovation and about team building and about how to make sure you get the best out of your team and that you cobble together the best possible group. So he talks about the 4 sets of people or the 4 types of people that you need to have on your team. And so a diversity of team members is critical if you're going to be innovative. So one of the things that he talks about are these 4 groups. So the collaborators, the creativity people, the competitors, and the controllers. So the creative folks are the ones who are like a little bit off the wall. Like they're coming up with the crazy ideas. They're always a little bit outside the normal, realm. They're coming up with things and people are kind of looking at them like, what are you talking about? But every organization needs a couple of these green folks who are the creative people who always want to do new things. Some of them may not be all the way well thought out, which is why you need to reel them in. But you need somebody who's going to think outside the box, although I hate to use that phrase, because you can't always push yourself forward. It's easy to bring back a radical idea and make it something workable. But if you never think forward, it's hard to get yourself there from inside your box. You need these people, the competitors. So the competitors are the draconian, cutthroat, like slash and burn, get rid of the competition, like get it done at all costs. And you need those people too, the competitors, the people who are actually going to go out and just be hardcore and slash and burn. But you need some people like that. You need the controllers. So these are the ones who are going to build the system. They're going to do the checks and balances. They're going to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. They are your, kind of uptight, close to the vest, making sure that everything runs smoothly, exerting a lot of control, and then the collaborators. So these are the people that build the relationships. They broker the communications. They build the teams. They are the glue that holds everything together. And you need all 4 of these people on your team. As you can imagine, The creative people who are always wanting to fly off the handle are in some ways opposite to these controllers who want everything to be held close to the vest. So these are opposites, and they probably annoy the heck out of each other, but you need both of them on your teams. You've got the competitors who are the draconian slash and burn people who are essentially the opposites of these collaborators who are building warm relationships and brokering, joy and happiness. But you need both. Again, they probably get on each other's nerves, but you need both. So I would submit to you that you probably can see yourself in one of these quadrants. I mean, some of us are all the way in one quadrant. Some of us are a little bit closer to the line. But you probably can see yourself in one of these quadrants. And so the question is, are you surrounding yourself with people who do not think exactly the way that you think so that you can make sure you've got the entire spectrum? So, he describes it kind of as a yin and yang phenomenon. So he talks about the green people having the vision, the blue people, the draconian ones, having the goals and going after them, the red people being about process, and the yellow people being about values or mission or culture. And so this is just a schematic that he uses. He uses it in the business model, but I think it applies to divisions and departments as well. And so he describes that what you have at the very beginning is you have the green people, those creative visionary folks who come up with this radical thing. It's often a little bit quirky. There's often a drop-off because you're trying to figure out how to implement this radical idea that they came up with. And then you bring in the blue people. So the blue people that are the slash and burn, go out there, beat down the competition, give them a goal, and they'll go after it with a tenacious spirit. And then you get on this upswing. And so then you bring in the yellow people. So they're building the collaboration, and they're making everybody happy, and people are buying into the vision, and it's all golden here. And then you get to the top. You've now got process, and you've got all the people who are making sure that the checks and balances are in place. But this is a point where it gets stale. And so you can't always continue on that trajectory. And what happens is you can stay here on this upward slope for a while, but then often you fall off, either because somebody else has come up with something innovative and they've come around you, or because something got stale, or whatever the situation is, and then you're back to the greens with a new idea. And so the question for you as you're building teams, as you're leading an institution, department, a division, is where are you on this curve? And is it time to start thinking about the next step so that you don't get caught, down here on the downslope? So, to use a military metaphor, create the forward position. Those green people are forward. And then you've got the middling position. So you have the competitors who are, elbowing out the competition. And you've got the collaborators that are moving you forward. And then you've got the aft position, which is control, systems, checks and balances, that kind of thing. So the flip side of the coin, and this will be my last slide about this, is that yes, you need all these people on the team, but as the leader of the team, you've got to manage them. And so they bring this wonderful expertise to the table, but there's a flip side to the coin. And again, when we're being introspective, whichever side of the graph you saw yourself, you have to realize that this is the flip side of what you need to know about yourself. So those green people, the creative ones, they can be unrealistic. They can be undisciplined. They might have a poor methodology and not actually know how to do what they're talking about. Those draconian people, the blue ones, overemphasis on competition. They have a short-term focus. They don't always see the long vision. And they can be autocratic in their decision-making, which does not necessarily foster the best from their team. The up in the yellow corner, so they can find themselves subject to groupthink. They're so busy building consensus and brokering conversation that they can fall into a groupthink kind of mentality, and you have to bring them back. Or they can be irrational in their enthusiasm. Everything is a great idea. They want you to feel good about it. They're positive about every single thing. And so you have to bring them back, and they can isolate themselves from external pressures in a way that means they're not actually living in reality. And then finally, the red folks in the corner, they're bringing professionalism and expertise, but they can be very rigid. There's a right way and there's a wrong way, and they cannot hear you when you're suggesting something that's new and different because they're so very focused on the checks and the balances. So wrapping up with the last couple of slides, diversity, whatever that means to you, whether that's gender, whether that's age, whether that's ethnicity, whether that's those 4 categories that we talked about, fuels discovery and brings excellence, whether it's a team you're building, an institution, a department, what have you. And so here are some papers from the scientific literature. So diversity brings increased creativity. So diverse teams are more creative than homogeneous ones, particularly when addressing complex problems. So if the problem is simple, you can have one way of looking at it and probably get to a reasonable answer. But if the problem is complex, you need multiple frames of reference, multiple problem-solving skills to come to bear on solving a complex problem with a nuanced answer that is actually the win-win. It broadens the scope of inquiry, so expands a range of research questions, some of which may have been previously neglected. So questions that nobody actually looked at before. You get some people, in those seats on the bus, and they start pushing you to think about things or look at things that might have been ignored in the past. Increases health equity, so a diverse team of researchers are more likely to ask and pursue the most appropriate questions in the most appropriate manner, and arguably get you the best answers to those questions because they're being asked in the right fashion. And so in a society where, constructs have framed workforce demographics, when we're talking about surgery, whatever that might look like, it's important that we know that, but we move forward and get, again, the best and the brightest in the chairs to help us solve the problems. So I contend that diversity is really the solution, not the problem. So making sure that you have each of those types of people that we talked about and those 4 quadrants on your team is going to be really important. And so if we think of surgeons as one particular mindset, or only as the reds or only as the blues, then we're going to miss the chance to create an entire house of surgery that represents all that we need. Because we need the skill sets, we need the experiences, we need the problem-solving expertise, and we need the experience with those challenges to make sure that we're really solving the problems accurately. And that brings along with it, capacity for empathy and attentiveness to all of these other issues that we may not think about. So wrapping up with collective intelligence, which is what we've been talking about essentially this whole last half of the talk. So collective intelligence is this phenomenon where the interaction of small amounts of information brought to bear by individuals is cobbled together into a whole that's more than the sum of the parts. And the actions of individuals bring together something that you wouldn't have predicted or you wouldn't have thought about. And so local information leads to global wisdom. That's one way to look at collective intelligence. And then there's this notion of superadditivity, which is when a collection of people work together and then one person makes a suggestion, then the other team members build on that, but that requires an appreciation, acceptance of, and valuing of the other points of view. And so again, if you're in blinder mode and you're thinking that your way is the only right way, then you won't open yourself up to building on and exploring this superadditivity. So, again, like I just said, it requires respect for and valuation of the differing viewpoints, and these synergies naturally develop, but they have to be facilitated by the leader, and that's really where the challenge is. And that's why I thought, this is an appropriate topic for today, because for all of you, the residents in the room or the junior faculty, you are leaders. You're going to be leaders if you're not already. And for the more senior people in the room, you're leading, whether that's your division, your team, your department, your institution, your practice. And so these are things that are written about in the business world, but have direct implications on the surgery world. And we often don't think of ourselves in that context. And I would submit that we fall short of what we could attain if we would, keep all of this in mind. So what does institutional progress look like? Isolated efforts, removing any entrenched barriers, that's kind of the old way of looking at innovation and the old way of looking at expanding your team. Moving forward to, diversity, all of these mindsets and that kind of thing as something that's a peripheral issue. Moving forward to diversity of thought and mind and ideas and experience being an integral core component which is required for excellence and innovation. So again, when we're looking at our match list, when we're looking at hiring new junior faculty, making sure that we are open to what they bring to the table as we build our team can actually help us be much more innovative than we might have thought we could be. So in conclusion, the impending surgeon shortage, maldistribution, we have some data to say that that's a real problem. There's inadequate funding for GME, so smart recruitment into surgery is critical. We can't afford to leave the best and the brightest, whatever that might look like, not matched into surgery or not believing that surgery is a career for them. Young surgeons are a diverse group, so they come from a lot of different places. They have a lot of different life experiences, and communication styles differ across generations, so we need to be thoughtful about the way that we interact with one another. And then finally, innovation and excellence require diversity on the teams that we build. So we have to be thoughtful about making sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And because we don't like the way that someone communicated with us or asked us a question or approached us, that we're willing to couch that in the context of what we know about them or what we could know about them and make sure that we get the best out of each of our team members. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there's time.
That was really fantastic.
Yeah.
That was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. There's one word I sort of picked up on in your talk, and it's in a weird brain. You mentioned grit. I just was wondering how you what your thought is on assessing new hires as a result in relation to grit.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually use that word purposely because there are things that are being written now about what characteristics yield long-term success. And words like grit and resilience are the words that are bubbling to the top. It's not only expertise or knowledge, it's resilience, bouncing back from adversity. Like, those are the sorts of things that create leaders that long-term are able to not be shaken off their foundation when things don't go well. And the more complicated things get, the more likely there's going to be some curveball thrown at you. And so, I think the definition, depending on who you read, is resilience. It's an ability to have a stressful situation and hunker down, nose to the grindstone, and get it done over adversity in a difficult situation. When the curveballs keep coming, tenacity, industriousness maybe. Industrious probably isn't as good as tenacity. But that is ultimately what some are saying now is the marker of the leader who's going to make it through to the end. More like the marathon, not the sprint. Because if you're smart, you can make it through the sprint, but you're not going to make it through the, whatever, fill in the blank, the marathon.
There's a certain amount of managerial corruption in big organizations that occurs, and we've all seen it. It's sometimes the most recent best-selling book on in the business world, that sort of thing. And you'll see managers over time that sort of flip from one style to another, develop all four quadrants at once sometimes, and it leads, they embrace the fiction that they can do that, and it is a fiction. And it leads in a big organization to often a set of managers who are regarded as just insincere, sometimes flighty. And there's a happy medium, and in our residents who are going to be going on to leadership positions and stuff, they might start out in one quadrant. They might prefer to stay in one quadrant. They're going to have to look at the value of adopting characteristics of other quadrants, and then somehow, some way, figuring out what their core is so that they don't come off as insincere.
No, you make a very good point, and I thank you for bringing that up, because it is not in any way my suggestion that you should try to be all things to all people. In fact, I think that's impossible. More helpful is to spend some time being introspective and figuring out which of those quadrants, or if you don't like that, there's like the DISC profile, or there's the Briggs-Myers. I mean, pick one, and it's worthwhile to do it and figure out what your native place where you live in comfort is. And then once you know that, you can absolutely identify areas of strength in other areas that you'd like to cultivate and do that. But more importantly, when you put your team together, you have to be honest with yourself and say, I am not that attention to detail person. So I need to hire somebody or bring in somebody or fill in the blank, acquire that expertise because it is not naturally mine. So there's some component of this that is flexible, and there's some component of it that's hardwired. So I'm not suggesting at all that we beat ourselves up about the fact that we're in quadrant 1 and not in quadrant 4. But if you know which one you're in, then you can try to build up the things that are weak in you, and then also build your team to provide support where you know that you're weak. Yeah. Well.
Patricia, that was a wonderful presentation, a wonderful talk. I want to sort of kind of echo a little bit what Dr. Hundal said, but also considering that sometimes you're starting off with a team of one, And then you have to somehow build that team of one up to a team of many. So I think there's some value of, if possible, encompassing all four of those quadrants: control, creativity, innovation, or at least be aware and to view life through those perspectives. So you don't miss on an innovation opportunity because you're too controlling, or you don't miss on a potential collaboration because collaboration didn't exist in that arena before. So I think there is some value to adopting personally some of the attributes of each of those four quadrants and being sort of nimble. So say now is the time to compete in this aspect, or competing is not right at this time. I need to collaborate with this aspect, or I got to think of something outside of the box because what we're doing is not working. So you know, sometimes in certain situations you have to do all four until you have the capacity to bring in other people who are more innovative or who are killers, like Donald Trump said.
No, agree with you entirely. And one of the things that I'll just say quickly, because I want to make sure I get to the next question, is so I talk about, I was asked to give a junior faculty educational thing at UT Southwest. So I had 4 hours with a group of like 25 junior faculty, and we talked completely about innovation. So one of the things that we did was we broke up into small groups, and we had a couple of problems, and so the whole team had to do like group think as blues, group think as yellows, group think as greens. And so it was really interesting to see what comes out of that. So you force everybody in the group to say, you know, I don't really care what color you are naturally, but get yourself in the mindset of those, you know, blue people, and what would you do to solve this problem? And it's amazing kind of what people come up with, but again, you have to like force them to say, I get that you're a green, but think like a blue right now. How would you solve that problem? And I think it's exactly what you're describing, because you're right, sometimes you have to be nimble. Yeah.
That is an area where I think we are all, a lot of the younger generation especially, is very opposed to failure. I am opposed to the discomfort of being a failure. But yet I feel that if I do not fail more often, I will not learn lessons that I should have learned, you know, the first time.
Keep writing grants.
Right.
Really great way to learn.
That's right. Great way to learn. You know, one of the I would go back to that book, How to Teach Smart People, and it's actually a worthwhile book. It's not new, but it's worthwhile. It's an easy read, and really that book that talks about not avoiding failure but accelerating through it actually harkens back to the grit question, which is you don't want to avoid it because you can. I mean, we can all kind of avoid failure if you don't try hard, or you don't try things that are challenging. Then you can avoid failure and be great all the time, but then you don't ever get beyond it. So trying to couch it in the way that is feedback is there for a reason, you know, kind of the coaching model. It's okay to fail. I mean, sometimes you actually have to tell people that, like, it is okay to fail so long as you move beyond it. Like, I get that that wasn't your finest hour, but from that you can learn A, B, and C, and now, you know, you file that away. It's another arrow in your quiver, and you can move beyond it. As opposed to, you never fail, you avoid it all the time, you don't ever reach beyond, and then, you know, when you're in the real world, whatever that might be, like out from under your wing, right? These are not trainees that are under your wing, so now they're out on their own, and they actually have a real problem. They're completely flat-footed. They've never had that situation happen. So better to fail under the wing of the parent or the teacher than to fail